Many believe that during the era of the Great Terror, any betrayal of the motherland inevitably led to the death of the entire family of the guilty party. However, the fate of the relatives of fugitive Chekist Alexander Orlov serves as a striking refutation of this seemingly ironclad rule. How did it happen that the ruthless and all-encompassing machine of repression failed in one particular case? The most common explanation for this mystery is linked to an extremely unusual step taken by Orlov himself during his escape in 1938. As a high-ranking NKVD officer and experienced resident, he possessed truly invaluable information. His position in Spain, where he oversaw covert operations and was responsible for the removal of the Republican government's gold reserves, gave him access to the most closely guarded secrets of Soviet intelligence. He personally recruited agents and knew their names, passwords, meeting places, communication methods, working methods, and meeting points in various corners of Europe. This information was critically important to Moscow, forming the basis of its influence and intrigues on the international stage. Imagine a quiet, twilight street somewhere in Paris or Brussels in the middle of the summer of 1938. In one of the inconspicuous cafes, at a table in the corner, sits a man with an ordinary-looking but extremely important envelope. His hands may be trembling slightly. He is a courier tasked with delivering a message that could turn the chessboard of world politics upside down. The recipients are Comrade Stalin himself and People's Commissar Yezhov. Inside the envelope, sealed so that any opening would be noticeable, lay not just papers, but the fates of dozens, if not hundreds of people, and perhaps the future of an entire intelligence network. Orlov, realizing that his escape would be seen as treason against the motherland and would inevitably lead to repression against his wife Maria Rosenberg and daughter Vera, who remained in the Soviet Union, decided to take unusual action. He sent a sealed letter to Stalin and the then head of the NKVD, Nikolai Yezhov. In this message, delivered by a trusted confidant, Orlov not only detailed his work and listed the names of Soviet agents in the West, but also made a shocking statement. He claimed that he kept copies of all these documents in a safe place, and that if anything happened to his family, if they were arrested, repressed, or if an attempt was made to kidnap him, these materials would be made public immediately. This was blackmail of the highest order, a kind of nuclear button that, according to many historians, worked. The exposure of such an extensive network of agents would have caused irreparable damage to Soviet intelligence. It was not just the loss of individual informants, but the complete collapse of many years of work, colossal financial investments, the discrediting of methods, and the undermining of trust in the USSR on the international stage. Stalin, being a pragmatist, could not allow such a development. The price of revenge on one man's family would be too high. In addition to the immediate threat of exposing the agents, there was a broader problem, the fear of compromising the entire system. Joseph Stalin was known for his obsession with secrecy and control. Any public admission of weakness or failure on the part of the Soviet secret services was tantamount to personal defeat and a blow to the image of an infallible state. On the eve of the Second World War, which would break out just a year later in 1939, the reputation of the USSR on the international stage was of paramount importance. The Soviet Union was actively seeking allies, trying to influence the policies of other countries and countering the fascist threat. Orlov's public exposure of the details of the NKVD's work could undermine confidence in Soviet diplomacy, cause scandals in countries where agents were operating, and significantly weaken Moscow's position in the global political game. Stalin, being a subtle strategist, understood perfectly well that the potential damage from the disclosure of the information Orlov had in his possession far outweighed his personal desire for revenge against the fugitive Chekist and his family. For him, maintaining secrecy and ensuring the stability and confidentiality of foreign policy operations was an absolute priority. Intelligence networks had been built up over many years, and enormous resources had been spent on their creation. To destroy them in one fell swoop because of a show trial of the defector's family would have been unforgivably foolish. Thus, Orlov's silence, bought at the price of immunity for his relatives, became a kind of investment in the security and effectiveness of the entire intelligence system. Orlov defected in 1938 at the height of the Great Terror, or as it was also called, the Yezhevshchina. It was a period of unprecedented purges when the NKVD, the main instrument of repression, found itself under attack. Hundreds and then thousands of NKVD employees were arrested, shot, or sent to camps on charges of conspiracy, espionage, and sabotage. During this chaotic period, the NKVD was paralyzed by purges and leadership changes. Nikolai Yezhov, the initiator of many repressions, found himself in disgrace, and his place was taken by Lavrentiy Beria. A change of power in such an agency always leads to confusion, personnel reshuffles, case reviews, and a redistribution of spheres of influence. In this feverish atmosphere, when everyone was trying to protect themselves and strengthen their positions, the case of the fugitive resident Orlov, fraught with high risk and potential exposure, could simply be swept under the rug.
No one wanted to take responsibility for such a high-profile failure, especially when the apparatus itself was in disarray. Acknowledging the fact that such an important agent had fled could have led to new purges and accusations against those who had supervised Orlov or should have prevented his escape. In an atmosphere of total mistrust and fear, it was easier to avoid admitting failure by postponing a decision on Orlov's case indefinitely. This allowed them to avoid exacerbating the internal chaos and drawing unnecessary attention to yet another painful incident in the ranks of state security. Perhaps at that moment, no one had the strength, desire, or resources to search for and pursue the family, preferring to wait until the situation stabilized. Stalin's apparent mercy towards the family of fugitive Chekist Alexander Orlov was not a manifestation of humanity at all, but a cold calculation in which the interests of the state and its secret operations outweighed personal desires for revenge. This is not a story of forgiveness, but rather of blackmail that worked, changing the usual course of repression. In addition to the versions already mentioned, it is worth delving deeper into the personality of Alexander Orlov himself to understand how a man with such a fate could challenge the system and emerge victorious. Lev Lazarevich Felbin, known by his operational pseudonym Alexander Orlov, was not just one of many Chekists. He came from an intellectual Jewish family and had a law degree, which set him apart from many of the less educated NKVD personnel. His sharp mind, analytical skills, and knowledge of several languages made him indispensable in the international department, where he quickly rose through the ranks. He served in various European capitals, participated in smuggling operations, oversaw the activities of Soviet illegal agents, and was even involved in the kidnapping and murder of White Guard figures. He was a man who knew not just a lot, but everything about the dirtiest and most secret operations of the Soviet regime abroad. His mission in Spain during the Civil War was one of the most important and secretive. Orlov did not simply oversee operations, he was effectively the head of the NKVD residency, reporting directly to Moscow. Under his leadership, not only were intelligence and counterintelligence operations carried out against the Francoists and their allies, but also, equally important, purges among the Republicans. He played a key role in suppressing anarchist and Trotskyist elements, organizing the arrests and executions of those whom Moscow considered unreliable. It was Orlov who was behind the transfer of the Spanish Republic's gold reserves to the USSR, an operation that was itself a colossal secret and required flawless coordination and absolute trust. He knew the names of everyone involved in the operation, the routes, the amounts, the logistics details, information that could have caused an international scandal. This knowledge made him not just a well-informed defector, but a potential threat on a national scale.
When Orlov decided to escape, it was not an impulsive act, but a carefully planned operation worthy of the best spy. He did not simply disappear, but left behind a delayed action mine. His letter to Stalin and Yezhov was not a plea for mercy, but a cold-blooded ultimatum. Its delivery by a trusted courier with a special sealing system for the envelope that guaranteed it could not be opened without being noticed speaks to his methodical nature and deep understanding of the psychology of those he was dealing with. He knew that addressing Stalin directly, bypassing the usual channels, would have an effect. It was an unprecedented act of direct blackmail against the head of state, who as a rule did not tolerate such liberties. To understand the uniqueness of Orlov's situation, one need only look at the fates of other high-ranking Soviet defectors of the time. Take, for example, Ignatius Rees, another prominent NKVD officer who broke with Moscow in 1937. His declaration of breaking with the regime was public and ideologically motivated. The result? He was brutally murdered by NKVD agents in Switzerland, and his wife and child were forced into hiding, constantly fearing for their lives. Or Walter Krivitsky, former head of Soviet military intelligence in Western Europe, who defected in 1937. He also publicly denounced Stalin's regime, and his fate was sealed. He was found dead in Washington in 1941 under very suspicious circumstances, and his family in the USSR was subjected to repression. Unlike them, Orlov did not make any loud public statements immediately after his escape. He remained silent, and it was this silence that was his main weapon. He did not become a traitor who immediately revealed all the secrets to the West, but became a silent witness whose silence was exchanged for the life of his family. For Stalin, who did not forgive the slightest disobedience, such an ultimatum was undoubtedly an insult. His usual reaction was immediate and merciless reprisals. However, in Orlov's case, pragmatism prevailed over the thirst for revenge. Orlov's threat was too specific and too dangerous. He did not simply threaten to reveal the regime's atrocities, which for Stalin would have been nothing more than shame from the Izba, but threatened to expose active agent networks that were vital to the USSR's foreign policy. Where exactly did Orlov keep these copies? In which country? With whom? These questions created unbearable uncertainty for Stalin. He could not afford to take the risk of testing whether it was a bluff. The fate of Orlov's family in the USSR, his wife Maria Rosenberg and daughter Vera, is the most convincing proof that the blackmail worked. While thousands of wives and children of enemies of the people were sent to gulag camps or special settlements, the Orlov family remained relatively free, albeit under unofficial surveillance. Maria Rosenberg, Orlov's wife, continued to live in Moscow after his escape, worked, and, incredibly for that time, was not arrested. Her daughter Vera also escaped the fate of the children of traitors to the motherland, who often had their surnames changed and were sent to orphanages. They were not deprived of their civil rights, were not exiled, and were not subjected to public condemnation. This was an anomaly that can only be explained by direct intervention or, more precisely, inaction on the part of the top leadership, motivated by very compelling reasons. Although there are no reliable facts explaining Stalin's decision, a combination of blackmail, fear of exposure, and tactical considerations probably played a key role.